I've always been told, like, stay away from investing in London.
It's because you're from Birmingham, isn't it? I never say there's no right or wrong answer to any question. Investing up north can be great for loads of reasons. Like in terms of yield, it's generally higher out of London because the property prices are a lot lower. Higher rents, lower property prices, therefore equaling higher yields. Bought his first property at 19 and bought a buy-to-let investment in Liverpool, where his capital requirement to get into that deal was about £12,500.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Traders Talk.
Can you just shut up, both of you, please? What?
I just want to say that I filmed a podcast this morning. We didn't need to edit, so if I was here, I would have made your job easier because I didn't have to stop all the way through, but it's fine, continue.
Hi guys, it's Madison from Connect here. Now today we're going to talk about...
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Traders Talk.
Can you just shut up, both of you, please? Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Trader Talk. This episode and a few of the episodes after this are going to be a little bit different. What?
I just want to say that I filmed a podcast this morning. We didn't need to edit, so if I was here, I would have made your job easier because I didn't have to stop all the way through, but it's fine, continue.
So the last 20 odd episodes that we've done have all been with traders. The next few episodes are going to be with some amazing people in different types of business industries to help traders put their profits into something other than trading to create a new source of income. Today's episode is with my good friend and property expert, Kazy. Welcome.
Welcome, Kazy.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. And you?
That's good. I'm great, thank you. I'm great.
Appreciate you having me on.
So obviously, we wanted to just do something different. So obviously, it's a trading podcast, but we just want to help traders be able to invest in different types of businesses and create a different source of income. Like, you've got your trading profits, what next? So explain to us a little bit about what you do.
So I'm a property developer and investor. I've been doing that for over a decade now. And I've kind of done everything in the property space, whether that's ground up new builds, residential conversions, commercial conversions, airspace development, rent to rent, you name it, I've sort of done it. And I've found a lane that works for me very well. And I've really always enjoyed just investing in property.
Love that. What is your lane now? Like, what do you focus on now?
So, you know, I used to use that as my intro all the time. And I'd be like, oh, that's great. I've done this, that, whatever. And over time, I really realized that, do you know what? Like, specialization is always really important because business is so big. The one thing that's the most abundant is there's always going to be more properties out there to do business with. There's always going to be more money to make. But the more you focus on a specific niche, the more you can like hone that craft and become an expert in your field. So at the moment I focus on two things, primarily flipping property, because I'm really all about growing my working capital to be able to invest in different ventures in the long term. So I buy properties from auctions, generally in good locations, zone 1, 2 and 3 in London, where there's scope to add value, be that through refurbishment, internal reconfigurations, properties that have problems and properties with short leases. So effectively, I don't want to rely on the market to be like, okay, this is what you bought it for and hope it goes up in value. Really looking at strategies that are actually going to allow you to create value and create value add from day one. So that's refurbishments, and then also I do quite a lot of residential conversions and small scale new builds. So that's when we would buy a typical large family home that there's maybe not as much demand for in an area and convert that into multiple units that would see a significant uplift.
Love that. That, I think, when I've looked into property so many different times, and I think that is like the most interesting part of property is like developing it, like taking something that looks awful and creating something beautiful. What would be your thing to recommend people who like want to get started in property? Obviously, like they're not going to go straight to developments.
Yeah.
What would be like the entry level thing that people can do?
So I think like it's an interesting question. As a starting point, I'm always like, how can you best utilize the money that you have? And where somebody gets started is really going to depend on the level of capital they have to invest. But, you know, as a starting point, I always say, have you bought your own home? Because the difference between buying an investment property versus buying your own home is that you benefit from having a much lower deposit, so 10% as opposed to the typical 25% for a buy-to-let. And also, whilst it is going to be your own home, anytime you spend money for an asset that you're going to hold for the long term, you should also kind of be thinking with that investment hat on, where's it going to go over time? And it's the multiplier effect. So if you buy a property that's worth 500,000 and you've got to put in a 10% or £50,000 deposit, if prices over the next 5 years go up by 50%, you're controlling assets worth £500,000. So you can potentially see appreciation of 250,000 with that £50,000 you put in. So when you're thinking about ROI, return on investment, you're in a way better position. So I always first ask the question about, well, where do you currently stand in terms of assets? Going forward, I think you're right. Like, one thing I say about property is this: it's no different from any other type of business. In that, like, say for example, tomorrow you want to open a sandwich shop. You're like, okay, cool, I'm going to go buy some breads, buy some cheese, or whatever your go-to filling is. I'm boring, I'll probably get peanut butter because that's a great sandwich, by the way.
Peanut butter?
Great sandwich, don't want to hear
Just
it.
peanut butter, just
No,
bread and
see,
peanut butter.
by the way, just as a general kind of caveat explainer, I eat like a child, so I want a peanut butter sandwich, a Marmite sandwich. Like, listen, I'm basic, so whatever it is, but you can do your fancy sandwich. But the point is, you go and buy bread, you buy your ingredients, as long as, you know, your time is valued for making it and there's an end market they're going to buy it, you know, you're going to make money from buying at the right price, being able to add value and selling for more. It's the same thing in property, but the difference is the costs involved are a lot higher. So there's a lot more risk. So whilst there are loads of strategies, you also need to make sure that you're aware of the skill set needed and the information needed, that you don't make those massive costly mistakes. So in terms of where somebody should go, I really think it depends on the people you have around you, the expertise that you can lean on. And much like the great thing about property, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert builder. You don't have to know all your legals. You can pay for a great build team, pay for a great solicitor, pay for a great accountant, structural engineer. So you buy in the expertise, and what you become is, I guess, like a glorified project manager, bringing all those people together.
Wow.
Makes sense. I know, like, when I've gone to different events and stuff within the property industry, people tend to recommend doing like essays first, just general rent to rent. What's your stance on that type of market? Like, would that be your recommendation as well? Or?
So for those who are not familiar, essays are serviced accommodation. So that model is effectively part of the rent to rent model. So what you're doing is, it's low barrier to entry. You know, you could get into that from a couple of £1,000s. You have to think about what you have at your disposal. Because say, for example, in the trading space, you're super busy, like you're locked in and that's what you do. You may not have the time to go and be dealing with bookings from booking.com. There's a leak, the tenant's calling you, then there's somebody's having a party. Like, the level of oversight that you would have to have may not be suitable for you. But more so, it's also about where you are versus where you want to be. So even if you do have a lower amount of capital, I think it's about, what do you want to get out of property? Because say, for example, you're somebody that's in a 9 to 5 that wants to get into property maybe full time, getting those rent to rent properties that potentially could cash flow you, and each property could cash flow you £1,000. So you could take on 3 and you could be at £3,000 a month and be in a position where you could leave your full-time vocation. If that's your goal, then it's fit for purpose for that. However, if your goal is to get into developments and owning assets, you're not really learning any skill sets in that rent to rent space that are going to directly help you to further your journey. So my question's always like, you know, or the answer to your question is always like, it's going to be circumstance specific. What do you want to get out of property, and where should you then pivot into?
But you start, because when earlier on you mentioned a whole list of things you've done, right? What is the actual starting point? I mean, like, how much capital would someone need, for example, who just wants to get in, like, just...
Again, because for argument's sake, like, I work with people that do all different types of investments. So like, one of the youngest people I work with is 19, bought his first property at 19 and bought a buy-to-let investment in Liverpool, where his capital requirement to get into that deal was about £12,500.
Okay,
That's what he needed to get that buy-to-let. And cash flows him now £250 a month positive cash flow. And that's what made sense for him. You touched on rent to rent, that maybe is 3,000 to 5,000. To go and start buying properties and flipping them at London, you might need £130,000. So there's no sort of, this is the right answer to how much you need. If you gave me like, okay, I'm interested in this strategy, we could then talk about what the parameters will be in terms of requirements.
That makes sense. Also, at the beginning, you said that you primarily invest in London. Now, I've always been told, like, stay away from investing in London. Like,
It's because you're from Birmingham, though. Like, really, isn't it?
No, but I mean, like, even like general London events I've been to, they're like, don't invest here. Like, invest down north because you need less capital and the appreciation is more.
Historically, the appreciation has never been more. Like, London's, as capital appreciation wise, it's always been a hub. For me, I think, again, I never say there's no right or wrong answer to any question. Investing up north can be great for loads of reasons, like in terms of yield. So your actual return on the investment itself is generally higher out of London because the property prices are a lot lower, whereas the rent disparity isn't as much. So you can get higher rents, lower property prices, therefore equaling higher yields. However, for what I do, it's about adding value. And London being one of not just the most desirable city to live in the UK, but one of the most desirable locations in the world. We live in a small island, there's a limited amount of space. Supply and demand is like, the cornerstone that underpins economics. We're not making new land, we're not Dubai, there's no sand dredging, there's a limited amount of space. So why I love London is, let's say for example, I talked about investing, I'll give you a recent example, buying a property in Brixton. Now, Brixton historically wasn't the best area, but geographically speaking, it's got great transport links into central London pretty close. If, for example, somebody wants to buy a property in Clapham that's like 20, 30% more expensive, if you refurbish a property to a really good standard in Brixton, it's still only like, less than half a mile away from Clapham, less than a mile away from Clapham. So you can attract that buyer. And then what we call like your GDV, your gross development value, or in most simple terms, what the property is worth at the end, you can effectively push the ceiling prices because you're in close proximity to those areas, where outside of London, your ceiling prices are set a lot more. So like, as investors, we're always thinking about our pound for pound return, right? The money I have to put in and what I can get out plus the money on top. If you're operating in an area where you have lower ceiling prices, then it's harder to add that intrinsic value to your property at the end.
That makes sense. Would you say, obviously, investing in London, you need a lot more capital than if you were investing up north?
Yeah.
Because there's like this whole thing in property of like, you don't really need much capital of your own, like getting investors and.
Look, any development flat, you can't buy houses for free. That's not a thing. Like it's 20 odd years ago when there were things like Mortgage Express where you could get basically 0%, like zero deposit mortgages effectively, or $5,000, like gone are the days with that, like post sort of financial crisis. Like you have to put money in. Yes, you can raise investor funding, very true. But it also depends on your attitude towards risk, your investor's attitude towards risk. Because if you've never done it before, like how likely is somebody to want to give you all their money to give it to the person who hasn't done it? So you can do all the courses, but it's like, okay, what have you actually done at this point? And don't get me wrong, like I said, investing in outside of London can be great, but I'm London based. So it's always about maximizing your personal skill set. I know loads about my local area. So when it comes to me doing appraisals of deals, what is the end value going to be? Sometimes in London, the difference between this road and this road like is 400,000 to 600,000 because one's in the right catchment area for the right schools. It's known as a better road. It's not a cut through road. Yeah. So having that local expertise, I always say lean on what you have.
I agree. There's a lot of people who also say like, invest up north and rent it out and just sit back and do nothing, right? And it's like for you and I basically, because we're from London, you don't know what's going on there. You don't know the area. So that makes a lot of sense, to be fair.
And I think with that, there's nothing wrong with that if like yield is your focus. And I think it depends where you are in the journey of your own career. Because you're speaking about obviously what traders can do with their profits, and depends what their attitudes towards risk is. Like that's something obviously is going to be very prevalent in the trading space, and it's going to be the same in property. Like what's your attitudes towards risk, and where are you within your own journey? Because again, I'm the person who's probably going to mess up a load of trading terminology because I haven't got a Scooby. However, what I would say is that in terms of understanding it, I'm in a space where I'm saying, look, I'm still want to create wealth. So I'm willing to take a few more risks, be a bit more active, work more. Yeah. Whereas somebody who's saying, look, I don't want to make wealth, I want to preserve my wealth, they're going to be in a position where they're saying, look, all I want to do is basically fight inflation. So as long as I'm getting 8%, if inflation's around the same, my money's staying the same, and I'm in a good position. But if you're in a place where you're saying, I actually want to make my money work hard for me, then I guess that's why I invest the way I do.
That makes sense. I think that's more like the angle that traders would probably be looking at as well, because I think it's, as much as people want to fight me against this, trading doesn't provide financial freedom. Like, you have to actively get up, look at charts, place a trade to make your money. Like, you always have to do something. Whereas my thing is, like, with property, it can be either. Obviously, like you say, you're doing flips right now, so you're working, like, you're in the trenches.
So it's not passive.
It's not passive. But if you were to not flip, retain the property and rent it out, that would provide a type of passive income.
Yeah, and I say that, like, I've done it simultaneously. So at the same time of flipping properties, I've also built a personal portfolio that, again, is, to a degree, it's not 100% passive, but you can make it as passive as possible. And I think, having a good management system in place, so I don't use local estate agents, but I employ somebody full-time as a property manager to manage my portfolio. So I couldn't tell you the name of my tenants, who's there, what they do. I just know that, they pay their rent, we do a rent review, the repairs are dealt with. So it's not 100% passive, it's not, but it makes that investment more akin to a more traditional investment vehicle, i.e. you put in this money, these years, this is the return you're going to get, like, per annum.
Yeah.
So how do you think traders can benefit from property then?
I think one of the massive benefits, obviously, I spoke about specialization, but also through diversification, you de-risk. Because let's say, and I don't know the parameters, but for argument's sake, if you're, like, property isn't really the get rich program. Like, unless you have a load of money, it's not where you go in just to get rich, because you need a lot of money to make maybe not the highest returns. But, because it's bricks and mortar, you have an element of stability, in a lot of circumstances, lower risk. And what I would say is, depending on the types of trades you're making and your attitude towards risk, you may potentially be able to make tens of thousands, you may potentially lose tens of thousands. Whereas there's an element of stability that you can create. And I guess for me also, like, the thing that I've always loved about property is, say for example, you own a house that's got £500,000 worth of equity in it. You could be like, do you know what, I can mess this up, I can mess that up. But that's like my I can't go broke fund. That's my, if I've got to go back to the war chest, this is what I've got over here. And I think for traders that operate in a space where there's a lot more fluctuation, you have to, trust, like, whether, I don't know if it's gut charts, expertise, research, wherever it is in the trading space that's going to allow you to be successful. If you've got something that effectively you're running two horses in the same race. So let's say, for example, you build a property portfolio that's positively cash flowing you, I don't know, £10,000 a month. And then you say, okay, with that money, I actually want to trade with £8,000, which means I'm trading with profits as opposed to trading with the money that I need to use. So I guess it could provide a level of security that maybe wouldn't be there in the same instance.
That makes sense. I think for a lot of traders, like for me now, like, I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, like, what's next? So I think a lot of traders, like, now we have, like, prop firms, which obviously you won't understand really what prop firms are, but to break it down simply, prop firms basically provide traders with capital to trade with. So I think traders now are making a lot more money at a younger age than when I first came into the industry. So I think a lot of traders now are at the point, like, they are looking for, like, what's next. Like, trading becomes it just becomes very mechanical. Like, it can be very stressful. So people are looking for things to kind of just take a little bit of that stress off. Would you say that property would be something that can kind of take away that little inch of stress? Or do you think doing something like property would add to the stress levels?
Listen, go and talk to a builder tomorrow. Talk to a builder for like a couple of hours and tell me if you're less or more stressed.
No, well, builders are going to be stressed. Builders are just generally stressed.
But they're part of the whole ecosystem, obviously. Property. Talk to okay, let me name people and you tell me whether you think they're going to add or reduce to your stress. Talk to a builder, someone you've got to regularly liaise with.
Stress.
Talk to a solicitor.
It's even more stress.
Talk to an estate agent. So you're dealing with people that generally a lot of the time they're going to stress you out. That being said, whilst the thing I touched on at the beginning is about buying an expertise, you don't have to do everything yourself. So for example, if you're in a position where, okay, what you have is you're cash rich from your investments, but you're time poor and expertise poor, you can look to partner with maybe a more established developer where you're either going to provide the funds, or you can look to do something where you are going to be maybe delivered a turnkey project. So i.e. they're going to find a deal for you, they're going to maybe help you with the build team, and then they're going to get paid all along the way for all of their services, but at the end you get to own the asset. So a great example would be companies that help people build HMO portfolios. So for those that don't know, HMOs are house shares, effectively the acronyms, houses and homes of multiple occupancy, where people are living together. But even the London space, where yield typically hasn't been as high, it's a way to maximize your returns but still operate in London. So let's say, for example, you were to buy a typical family home, maybe like a 3-bedroom house, and you were to do a loft conversion, rear extension, and you've now got a 7-bed HMO. It went from somewhere that was previously renting for maybe £1,700 a month. Now you've got 7 rooms at whatever the price point may be, at £900 a room. You've now got something that's making you 6,300. So even after expenses and your mortgage and other stuff, it's cash flowed really well. Because it's gone up in value considerably, and it's now like a commercial asset because it's based on the rental income. You get a commercial valuation. So even though you would have spent money, like on your loft conversion, on your refurb, on your extensions, you can recoup that by refinancing, get money back out and go again. And yes, you'd still leave money in the property, but your personal loan to value, i.e. your cash in the deal versus the value of the property, would be a lot less than if you just went to go outside and just bought a finished product.
Yeah. So I just thought about something. So for people who are like still actively trading and don't necessarily have like a lot of time to put into property, because obviously you put a lot of time into actually property managing all the different people that you deal with, would you recommend traders find someone like you who is very experienced in property and basically just invest in them? So as opposed to actually getting properties themselves, go to someone who already has properties or already has the experience and basically give them their money, which I think we see a lot on social media of people asking for finance, giving them the money and just getting the return on that.
Whereas I'm a massive fence sitter. I'm always going to sit on the fence with these questions. But again, it's because there's no real right answer. But yes, that can work. For someone who's just like, look, I want to know that my money's safe. I can get whatever security that I need from the asset itself, because you've got a physical asset you can get an element of security from. And I'm going to lend you money. As long as I can get this return, that's all I want. Then that's going to be great for that person. There's going to be the person that's like, no, do you know what? I actually want to get into property, but I don't have the expertise or the time to deliver. And for them, maybe like a joint venture would be more appropriate. So where they partner with and become a joint owner of the asset with whoever the established developer is, and they bring the capital, whereas the developer, like someone like myself, is something that I do. I would bring the expertise, find the deal, deliver the project, and we would both benefit from the uplift. Upside is you have a higher potential return, but also you're also exposed to the potential risk as well, because as a joint venture, you benefit from the ups and the downs. And the third option would potentially be to say, as I touched on earlier, would be to say, look, you know what, let me go and buy in the expertise. So pay someone to effectively do everything, to source the property, manage the refurb, but at the end of the day, you own the asset. And all of those things are things that can work as ways to invest in property. It's just about what your personal goals are, what you think is going to work for you. Some people hate the idea of a JV partner thing. Look, I don't want to be sort of tied to anybody for a long period of time. Some people love the idea of, actually having someone that can take an element of the risk stress away from them.
Makes sense. Our lovely Brian over here has just given me a good question. What is your thoughts
How do we know Brian's lovely?
I worked with Brian for long enough. So
okay, I'm just checking. I don't want to be saying stuff that could be untrue.
No, our crew's good.
On to Brian. Wow, Brian's getting the smoke today.
Behind the cameras.
I know it. So what are your thoughts on REITs? Is that how you say it?
Rates?
REITs.
REITs.
Stick to Forex, mate.
This is what I do for me. REITs or real estate funds?
At my level, it's not something that I really deal with and engage with. So
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, so that again, it's obviously you're putting money into a fund where effectively they're gonna. So it's a higher level of what we just spoke about. Look at an established fund that's going to be investing in property, and your return is going to be based on the success of or like lack thereof
Okay.
of the fund itself.
So essentially that is basically like, if I'm understanding this correctly, it would be basically like investing into, like for traders, like the S&P 500.
Effectively.
But instead it's like a property version,
Yeah.
basically.
Ish.
Ish, kind of. Not really.
I don't know what's going on. See, and you said he was lovely.
He set you up.
We need Brian in the camera.
So I'm curious, right? Because you mainly invest in London, you say. So we've got traders like around the world, everywhere. And how do they identify a good property? Like, what are the steps you take to find something that you want to just put your head down on and invest in?
Yeah, I mean, so top level, like if you're going to invest in like a buy to let or like just a turnkey, we call them vanilla buy to let. It's very straightforward. You buy the property for this amount, your rent is this, your associated costs are going to be this. It's just yield based. Like, does that make sense? There is also, you need to think about the bricks and mortar valuation, because whilst you are buying based on investment, 80% plus 90% of buyers are buying based on it being a home. So although something may yield really well, and let's say, well, the yields justify you paying £200,000 for it. If you only represent a small amount of the market, you've also got to think about disposal. If you ever wanted to sell the asset and are buying something that was only linked to the rental yield, then potentially you could end up overpaying. So you do also need to consider like what the properties actually sell for as homes. If you're looking at flipping properties or adding value, then there's a strategy that we call reverse engineering the deal. So if you buy something if you're looking at something in a rundown state, and I'll use auctions as a really good example. If you go to auction, there'll be a guide price, right? And the guide price is really just marketing. That's kind of what we think it may sell for, but you take that and you sort of ignore that. You say, okay, that's what you said you want for the property, but let me actually now work it backwards. So in a great finished condition, what is this house going to be worth? So when you compare it to like-for-like properties in the area, ones with similar amenities, either gardens, parking, ones of similar size in terms of square footage, ones that have been done to a similar condition, and then ones that are also the same type of property. So you don't want to be comparing an ex-local to a Victorian property. And the final consideration is like things like the costs, so like your service charges that are your cost of actually holding that property. So you do all of that and you work out your comparables and you say, look, that's going to be the end value. After that, you take into account, well, what's it going to cost me to get to that stage? Like how much of the work's going to cost, you take away all of that. Most people are buying properties with lending. So what's the cost of your finance? And then what are your associated purchase costs, i.e. stamp duty, legal fees, searches, surveys, etc. You deduct all of those things and then you say, okay, what profit margin would I be happy with? And you deduct that. And that figure that's left over would effectively be what you could comfortably pay for the property.
Right, I see. So there's so much going into it. Yeah. Would you say there's any like factors that could all of your, I don't know, your accounting?
Yeah, I mean,
like economic factors or anything like that?
Yeah, so like we have to think changes in government legislation can have massive changes. So for example, one of the most recent ones has had a mass impact on landlords and has caused a semi-exodus of the typical buy-to-let landlord. The changes in the way tax is viewed, expenses are viewed from a buy-to-let perspective.
Right.
So previously, let's say for example, you owned a home and you had a mortgage of £800 a month and you were renting it for £1,000. You could claim in your individual name that £800 as an expense, just because of changes that didn't happen overnight, but happened, over a tiered period over like 5 years. The ability to claim that as an expense was taken away, which means you're now paying tax on the whole £1,000, which then meant a lot of buy-to-lets owned in your personal names now became either super inefficient or even unprofitable. So that's why you've seen a lot of people that now talk about investing, they are primarily buying properties, in limited companies to allow them to benefit from that tax saving.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And have you, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you, but have you ever had projects which
Do you know what? I've never had a project that was unprofitable. I've had ones where I haven't made as much money as I would have liked. But I think like if I was to give anybody like the number one rule in property is you make your money when you buy. So of course I've made mistakes. Of course things have gone wrong. Like, say for example, I'm building a rear extension. in a recent one, planned to do a rear extension, typical like 1 meter foundations. Turned out there was a massive tree in the neighbor's garden, which meant we couldn't do typical foundations. We couldn't do raw foundations. Had to go and do full piling, cost an extra £25,000. There were then changes in Part L of building regs, which meant like all of the external walls had to be insulated, which reduced the size of the property, which again kind of affected values, but also was a load of additional works. So in that project, I probably, overspent by £45,000.
Oh, wow.
But the upside is if you buy right and you finish to a great standard, you should be able to push your GDV up. So although, we initially wanted to sell for, I think it was like just under 1.1 million, we ended up selling for just under 1.2. So even after all of the extra expenses, the deal was still profitable. And I would say that to say a lot of people get lost in the details. Like, I need to be able to cost a refurb perfectly. But your refurb, like if you're refurbishing a flat and the refurb's £50,000, the relative impact of you going over budget by 10 or even 20% is 5 to 10,000. If you do a really good standard of finish, you can increase what the property sells for at the end. Also, if you buy it smart at the beginning, you also have more wiggle room to make mistakes. So I would kind of say as a takeaway, like buy smart to start with, and also don't try and massage the deal to make it make sense for you. One of the biggest mistakes I see people making is them saying, because they're struggling to find a deal, they're struggling to find a property that makes sense, they'll force something, they'll say, you know what, like I budgeted 50,000, but maybe if we cut some corners, we could get the refurb in for 40,000. And then I know my cost of finance is 35, but it takes 12 months. If I do it in 6, it's only going to be 6. So they start to try and cut corners and make up ways they're going to save money. It's never really going to happen.
Right.
And so they're on such tight margins that when it does go wrong, they're making a loss.
And what is the main agenda behind like property developers when it comes to, because think of it like this, right? When I was living with my mum, the building was over 100 years old. And these buildings go strong, but now that I've moved down to my own place now, and it's a brand new building, but it's like, there's more f***ups on new buildings than there are on the old school buildings. Does this mean that property developers are always looking for the cheapest possible solutions to maximize profits for them? So the split's better?
I mean, it's probably a give and take. Like, anyone in business is going to look to drive efficiencies. So they're not going to go and get the most expensive products. And like, if for example, you take things like tiles in the bathroom, there's tiles for £10 a square meter. There's tiles in the thousands of pounds a square meter, and there's obviously it's fit for purpose. I mean, in terms of the actual building materials, I think there's a lot to be said for the skill set of like Victorian builders. I'm a personal massive fan of Victorian homes. Like I love them. I think they have a lot of character. But I think it's about trusting in good developers that are finishing a high standard project. I think a great example recently was I just finished a project out in Fulham. And we finished it and we're about to go to market and noticed like some cold spots on the wall where it wasn't drying properly, went back to go and get damp reading. It turns out there was some damp. Now I could have just sort of thought, let me just tidy it up quickly, paint it, see what happens, see if somebody will buy it. But because my thing is about, longevity and not just being in the game for a good time in the short term, but being here for the long term, I actually went to go and probably have to spend an extra £10,000 that basically doing a damp course for all of the walls, taking them back to brick and going again. So I think it's like anything, like you could always make a quick buck, but it's always going to be short term and that short term mentality. And it's like, well, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? How important is your name to you? How important is your integrity? I think that is just a personal issue for developers as a whole, as opposed to the means of construction.
Right, that makes sense.
I've been seeing a lot on social media recently. There's been some new legislation come out that I'm not fully aware of. I'm not 100% what it is. But I know that it's having a huge impact on landlords and basically like the right of the tenant to basically remain in the house. What is that and how much impact do you think that is going to have on the industry as a whole?
So effectively, what they're doing is removing Section 21 notices, which basically is when you evict a tenant. But what they're removing from the Section 21 is non-fault evictions. So basically you just being able to say, I just want you out just because, for no justification. So no rent arrears, no breach of tenancy and things like that. I think for a lot of landlords, they see it as quite frustrating because they feel like, well, it's my home, I own it, I should be able to do what I want with it. But at the same time, it's also the tenant's home. They live there, they may be raising children there, they may have them in local schools. So I understand, and I think for the good landlords, it's probably not going to have a massive impact. For good landlords want to keep tenants for a long period of time. They don't want tenants to leave because voids cost money. Of course, like, you know, cost of living, rents have gone up and they have had to increase. But I think a lot of legislation, they really affect like bad landlords. But, you know, I think over time with more, you know, the larger developers like Berkeley Homes going into a lot of build to rent accommodation, you're seeing the standards and the expectations from tenants being a lot higher, which I think, you know, is only a good thing for both tenants and landlords. Whereas before, you know, landlords just used to see tenants as tenants and not as customers. So it was just like, well, I'll get around to it, you know, oh, I've got something's leaking, oh, I'll kind of just send someone out when I can. My cousin's a roofer, he said he can come in 2 weeks. Now it's like, you know, it's tenants are customers. That idea of like customers always right, like SLAs, deliveries on time periods to say this needs to be done by this day, and standardization. So like for someone like myself who has like a full-time property manager who invests in the tenant journey and making sure that they get looked after, if anything, you know, those standards being in place are like are good for me because it's already things that we're doing. And we don't generally evict tenants. I don't think, apart from if we're disposing of an asset, have never really just evicted a tenant just for no reason. So for me personally, it doesn't have an impact, but I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people think.
What impact would it have? So say, for example, someone has a tenant that has been a great tenant for the last, let's say, 5 years, has now fallen into some type of financial difficulty, has just gone down a wrong path, is now struggling to pay their rent. What impact does that have for that landlord?
So for that tenant, not that much, because if you're being evicted through rent arrears, so if you're in 2 consecutive months of rent arrears, it would be a Section 8, and you can still evict under that basis. You do have to go down the whole possession route with the courts, which again is just for the landlords. I think the thing is, like, for the landlords, it requires them to be compliant, because you can't evict a tenant unless you're acting compliantly as a landlord. I.e., you have the right gas safety certificates, EICR, so the electrical certificates, EPCs in place, you've given them all of the information in right to rent, you've protected their deposit, and all of the rest of the compliance stuff that you have to do. So again, for landlords that are already doing that, they're like, well, if a tenant doesn't pay their rent, I'm going to go down this procedure. For the landlords that don't, then, you know, they will try and evict a tenant and realize, well, actually, I wasn't doing my job as a landlord as well. But I think for landlords that are overly concerned about it, like, you know, obviously, majority of us have got mortgages to pay, we've got bills to pay, and people end up almost having a very divisive attitude between landlords and tenants, like, you're not paying, you're doing me wrong. But I think it's about having active communication. Like, what is the issue and how can I solve it? Because we get into business in most cases as entrepreneurs, and as entrepreneurs, problem solving is what underpins the entirety of our business and us being able to strive and be able to be successful in that field. So have the conversation, like, what's the issue? Do you know that maybe if unfortunately they were working full time and maybe it's ailments, maybe it's health, maybe, you know, it's just changing circumstances, maybe they are able to obtain some benefits that are going to support them during the period, or understand, okay, is there a payment plan that we can put in place? What can we do? I think if you have those conversations first, you're a lot less likely to end up with massive rent arrears and deficits in your bottom line as a landlord. And likewise, the tenants are a lot more likely to want to work with you if they feel like you're working with them rather than against them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Are you good at Monopoly?
I'm cold at Monopoly.
Seriously?
No. You see, lockdown, there's one person that, like, you see the online PlayStation Monopoly? Yeah. One person, I'll give him his flowers. He's better than me. But everybody else who was playing Monopoly for online was cleaning up. Yeah.
Is that what got you into property?
Do you know, I always like Monopoly. But you know, if you haven't played it, by the way, Monopoly Deal, it's the Monopoly card game. They should, like, give you a plug or sponsor this episode, because that card game there, it's like, imagine Monopoly mixed with poker. It's like one of
I've never heard of that.
best games I've ever played. In lockdown, we were playing that game for hours and hours on end.
Mad.
But it's, the concept of Monopoly is obviously, basically, you have to invest. If you just don't spend your money and spend your whole time going around the boards, eventually everybody else is going to buy a property and you're going to have to start paying them. And You may be the guy that's cash rich, but you end up paying to eventually you go bankrupt. And that's the real premise that you take away from Monopoly. If you want long-term wealth, you have to make investments, or you just end up paying everybody else.
Right. So how did you like, why property? What made you start property? Was that your childhood dream?
No, I don't know what my childhood dream was. I think I wanted to be an actor at a point.
It makes sense.
I see that.
Yeah,
I see that.
So do you know what? Yeah? I wanted to be an actor, and then I thought, oh, this is not really gonna
That's
happen.
where the diva comes from.
Yeah, maybe, but then also I'm like also low-key introverted, so I never actually tried it. But it was like in my head it was a good idea. But I've decided I'm gonna go and take improv classes this year. So you know,
No way.
not just from the presenting side of things and having conversations with people. And I think it's something like it's good to find hobbies that you enjoy.
Yeah.
But to go back to your question, no, like I always just like business. I like the idea of not even necessarily so much. I never really loved money, but I like problem solving. I like being able to see something, find a solution and see it works. And you get that feedback loop in property. But I was never like, oh, I want to get into property. My first business was actually a Shisha business.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, sort of post-smoking vans. Like, you know, again, it's an opportunity. Like there's nightclubs, bars are creating all these outdoor spaces where, you know, smokers are going to go and smoke. So we then approach them and say, look, we can do Shisha here. It's not going to cost the venue anything. We'll charge the consumer directly. So it was a win-win and worked really well. Took that into going to do festivals and pop-ups, which were, you know, you're milking thousands of pounds a day doing these pop-ups at festivals. And then went to go and get like my own premise, which, you know, was quite financially rewarding. But I think one of the things that happened in that business, whilst the business was successful, we had something called a license to trade. So if you have a lease on a commercial premise, effectively you can stay there for as long as you want. A license is very much like a tenancy in a conversation we just had where the landlord could evict you with 2 months notice at any time. Right. So this property had like loads of potential, had this massive basement, could have put a club down there, could have done all these things, but couldn't do anything because we didn't own the building. So it was kind of like for going forward, it made me say, you know, whatever I do next, like I need to be in control. Like people that know me know that ownership. I love control. I'm quite anal and stuff. I like to know exactly what's going on. I didn't have that. So I was like, okay, cool. Like that kind of made me say, okay, look, I need to think about property. Bought my first one when I think I was about 22, 23. And that was my proof of concept. Impressive. So like if you do something and it works, like I'm sure like you might not start trading and it goes well straight away. You spend a little bit of time to learn. You're doing like dummy stuff and your dry runs and you're kind of getting akin to it. But when you start doing it, that's why I say I don't love money, but the money is what allows you to say it worked. Because otherwise you could say it worked just because it looked nice. But you know, so that's, I think, so that was my proof of concept. And I said, okay, cool, it works. And then if you're ever like up in the Shard and you look out and you can just see how many buildings out there, when you start to get into that, well, property is what I do. Look how many opportunities there are out there. I only need that 0.00001% of this market to do something amazing.
For sure. Massive industry, innit? Mad.
So I want to get a little bit into like the mindset aspect, because in trading, mindset is huge, but I am aware that that is also huge in a lot of other industries. But guys, we are going to leave that until the next episode. So make sure you come back next week to hear Kazy's thoughts on mindset when it comes to property.